Hello, Vicky. Welcome to the Emil Barna Podcast. I'm really looking forward to this. I was excited before the interview to get this started and get an understanding of the input that you have from both a psychological, mental health, and a martial arts background. So I just want to get. I won't take too much time in the introduction. I'll get you to tell me a little bit about yourself, tell our listeners who you are, where you come from, and what it is that you do.
Thanks, Emil, for the interview. I really appreciate it. As Emil said, my name is Vickie Simos. Just a bit of background, which could probably go for the next 5-10 minutes. I originally come from a country town out of Adelaide, South Australia called the Riverland. That's where I've had my first experience with martial arts at the age of 15. And it was purely for a boy because I knew he was doing martial arts. So I thought, well, let me go do the same thing. But I have to thank him now, 20, 30 years later. I then, from the Riverland, I moved to the city at the age of 19. Stopped martial arts for a few years. I got into my soccer, played soccer for that many years. And then something drew me back to the martial arts at the age of 25. And have basically been, doing it ever since. So I stayed at this particular gym for 11 years. And I heard about this martial artist or instructor who helped you get your black belt. So when I finished Taekwondo, which is the first martial art I started, I had a brown belt with a black strip. So people were telling me, go see this particular gentleman. He's a senior grandmaster now. His name's Vince Palumbo, and I went and saw him, and I stayed 11 years and ended up learning, 5-6 different martial arts with a black belt in 2 of them, or I should say 2nd degree in one of them, 4th degree in the other. And I've been, working in the martial arts ever since, primarily in boxing, because that was my first love and the one that got my attention the most and the most challenging one. And now I use my martial arts and my qualifications through counselling and psychotherapy and gel the two together to get the best out of people, I guess. Be your best self, as my shirt says.
I think this is really cool. Okay, so you're speaking with a relative novice when it comes to martial arts. I mean, my children do mixed martial arts, and I've always been interested in martial arts, but I've never actually gone that step to start training and do that sort of stuff. There's always a future, and I really hope that I'll get into that as we move forward, because I see the utility of it. But when you speak with me about things like stripes on your belt and the different belts and all that sort of stuff, to me kind of just blends. I don't know what that means. So for people out there, how does the belt system work, and what is a brown belt with a black stripe on it, and all that sort of stuff? For people who want to know a little bit of that.
First of all, I'd like to apologise because I've always been accused of talking like people know what I'm talking about. So let me go a little bit backwards. So depending on the martial arts, so if it's karate works on belts. So you've got your white belt, which is your beginner belt, yellow, green, blue, brown, and of course black. And everyone knows what a black belt is. And it's the same thing with the stick fighting, for example, which I'm qualified in, which is a Filipino martial art. Its Filipino name is Doce Pares Eskrima. And that works with a different belt system, but in the end, it ends with a black belt as well. So the way I call the dance, so the dance are further than the black belt. So it's like getting your a bachelor's degree and then going to get your master's or a PhD or your honours. So furthering your education at uni is like furthering your education through martial arts. So you have your 1st degree, 2nd degree, and some martial arts will go up to a 12th degree. Does that make sense?
And the degree, so someone's like I'm gonna pick your brain a little bit more, because I think I want to kind of get down into specifics, but I'm following you so far. With the degrees, does degree mean a stripe in the belt, or does a degree mean something different?
Yes.
All right. So backtracking a little bit, you mentioned that you've gotten involved in 6 different types of martial arts. For our listeners,
correct,
what are these martial arts that you involved yourself in?
So I started with karate, which is a Taekwondo. So that's karate when I was 15 years old. And then when I moved on to continue my arts, there was the kickboxing, stick fighting, boxing, and jiu-jitsu. I did a couple of years of jiu-jitsu, so I think it's about 5 of them, 5 disciplines.
Oh, wow. Which one did you enjoy the most?
The boxing, because that was the one that was the most challenging, and I think the one most related to the psychology of someone, because that was one of my most challenging, and that's where you learn flight or fight, and it's also the one where the emotions come to the surface.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about that. I'm curious to hear how that relates more to psychology in your experience.
I'm so glad you asked. And I guess it had the most effect. So from a psychological perspective, you can include a few different therapies in that. So, you got your solution focused, your emotional focused, but also there is that neuroplasticity. So, and that works all over all the martial arts, but I think with boxing the most, because you're using both sides of your brain, which is similar to the stick fighting, because it's a right brain, left brain sport. Even though you're left-handed, for example, you do use your right hand and vice versa. So I think from that perspective, that's where that psychology comes into it. And with boxing, you're just one person in the ring. It's not a team sport. And if you're getting in the ring, which I've done on numerous occasions, someone actually, not that they want to hurt you, but that's what it's about. It's about who gets in the more punches, who's afraid more, who makes that first attack, defense sort of thing. And if you have, and if I'll go a little bit more personal, if that's okay, if you've got issues like I had with low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and you're getting in the ring and you're already worried about, oh my God, what if I lose? What will my friends say? What will people say? That already has that effect. And with boxing, what it has become for me now is more of a mindfulness. So you've got to be present. And that was the one difference that I had. When I was competing, I wasn't present. I was too worried about everything else around me.
So before the fight and potentially after the fight, that's when the self-esteem or the confidence issues may wax. But when you're in the fight, I would assume that all that goes away and you're just trying to attack the beast in front of you.
You would assume that generally should happen, but unfortunately for me, it didn't. I was fine just before, like knowing in my head, yep, no problem. And as soon as, and especially on the occasion of where fighters pull out or something like that, and then, in your head you've got, okay, I'm fighting at 2:00, for example, but then you find out, you're fighting at 1:00 and it's like this anxiety and it freezes, it froze me to the point of, and this is going to sound crazy, where you'd have my instructor come in and he'd have to actually like give me a couple of knocks to sort of wake me up, I suppose is the best example, because it's literally like, and I've written this in the book, having this out-of-body experience like you're watching someone else and I can't get out of my own head.
And that book for our listeners is The Boxer Within. So I'm holding up the book on the video version, but for the audio version, it's a book you wrote in, what year was that when that book was published?
The book was published in 2017. It took me about 7 years to write, but I was also studying at the same time and working. So yeah, it took me about that long, but a very cathartic process.
I could imagine it smacks similar of any type of personal story. When we're putting it through the pages, it forces one to really sit down and lay out those experiences as they've happened or as we remember them happening, because everyone's got it. Especially if you're talking about somebody else within the context of your story, they may have a different memory of the thing than you do. But if you can always fall back on your own experience, and that is a hugely cathartic experience as you're mentioning here. So let's back up on what you've mentioned. All right, so boxing, as I'm following you, is more of is that fight, flight, freeze process and it's a very mindful process in your experience where you can just kind of get into the ring and be focused on what it is that you're doing. The prior to and the post fight, they have their own experience as well. I want to ask, how did you decide you were ready to fight when you'd been training for however, like how long did you train for before you're like, okay, I'm ready to fight?
Good question. I wasn't, it's funny because it wasn't me and this is going to sound weird, it wasn't me that made the decision because of that low self-esteem, low self-confidence. And once you get that ability, you know yourself, you are good enough, but it helps when someone else tells you. And that was my instructor. He had this amazing ability to see the potential, which I see now in others, to sort of say to you, okay, let's do it. Very unorthodox. And don't get me wrong, we had a few issues along the way, but it was really him that got me to this point, and myself as well. So just going back to answer your question, I just wanted to give you some context. It was more him than me that went, yep, you're ready to fight, sort of thing. So he would be saying, right, I think you should fight in the next fight. And you didn't say no.
And if you did say no, what would be the issue?
Well, you just didn't say no. I learned to say no later on, 10, 11 years later. But in the beginning, because it was one of those things of, I don't know if you've ever grown up with low self-esteem, low self-confidence. When you have someone believe in you, you start believing in yourself. Yeah,
it does help, especially when it comes to, we'll get to that later, when it comes to the psychology of your experiences, and when you've had so many experiences throughout your life that either reinforce or take away what you believe about yourself, that can really do. And if you're trying to perform for somebody else, that's the important bit. Like you're performing for your parents as a young kid, or family members, you want to gain their approval. And if you're getting the finger nod or the finger wag, often it's kind of like, okay, well, you try to build up your acceptance through other people, and self-confidence often comes later on. So I can definitely follow that, and I can relate to that as well. Do you remember your first fight?
Oh, I do. I had to lose at least 10 kilos. And that was the first problem, because in boxing, it works on weight, different weight categories. So, of course, when your trainer tells you to lose weight about 6 to 9 months earlier, you should do that. But I didn't do that. So, of course, we're very literally close to the night before of having to lose 3 kilos. But we did that. So I had to be under 60, which I wasn't obviously at the time. Luckily, I didn't get knocked out. There was that numbing experience, the everything. I didn't win my first fight, and I haven't won a lot of fights, but we can delve into that later, because there is that psychological part of that. But yeah, I do remember my first fight like it was yesterday.
Okay, so this is cool. Walk us through what happened before the fight and during the fight, and what you remember after the fight. Because my sense is that's a whole lot of adrenaline and cortisol running through your body, that for a lot of people, that just cements the memory even more, and it makes it even more vivid. Other people, it kind of blocks the memory, but for a lot of people, it just makes it even more vivid.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, walk us through that.
Not for me. Okay, so don't judge the instructor, but one of the methods for trying to get me to lose weight was to put on the stick fighting gear, which weighs 4 kilos. Now, this was the day before. And with weigh-ins for boxing, you actually weigh in the same night you're actually fighting. So you have to be that weight. And obviously, you got to watch what you eat. I was literally down to tuna. It took me 2 years to eat tuna again. I just didn't even want to see a can of tuna. The other thing that we did, so going back to dressing me up in this 4 kilo of armor, we actually had a little swig of vodka to sweat it out. So this was in the morning, and then we went for a bit of a jog. So I think I went a couple of Ks wearing this 4 kilos, and we managed to drop the weight. The other thing that he did was a really good psychological thing, was change the scales. So he made the scales a couple of kilos heavier, so then you knew that you're under. I didn't know this at the time. He told me after the fact, of course, because he didn't want you to sort of affect the way you eat and drink and whatever. So leading up to the fight, I actually thought that I was still going to be over, because I was dressed in my jeans and a tank top. And usually you should weigh in as a female, weigh in with your bikini. But because I was so anxious and everything was building up to that moment, I'd forgotten to bring my bikini. And he's like, no, you'll be fine in jeans and a tank top. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Oh my God, what if I'm still over? Of course, I was well and truly under. I was 57.5 by memory with jeans and a t-shirt. And it was like, you've got to be joking. And he starts laughing, saying, yeah, I changed the scales, so I knew you were going to be under. So then getting into the ring, you know, you've got everyone watching, your friends, people that don't even want to see it have turned up, because some of my clients. Obviously, like I said, I did lose. She was a bit more experienced than me, but I didn't get knocked out, which is a plus. But it was an amazing experience after the fact, because you realise you could actually do anything. Like, it sounds, I don't know, cliche, I guess, but you can. It was like, oh my God, I've just survived being in the ring, 3 rounds or whatever it was, 2 minutes. You know, someone's actually hitting you and vice versa, and you're trying to win this fight. And of course, I didn't have those experiences of the outer body, because you didn't sort of know until you got in there. And that's when it sort of started happening. But of course, you can mistake that for just anxiety. Like my first fight, I don't know what to expect. But unfortunately, that sort of followed me through to some of the other fights.
Yeah. So it wasn't a matter of, okay, if I lose this fight, then I feel 100% worse than I did before the fight started. But for you, it was more like, I can do this. Like it doesn't matter. It's irrespective of whether I lost. I can actually put myself in front of the monster, you know, metaphorically speaking. I can face it, and I wasn't consumed by it. I survived. I moved forward. Is that an accurate representation?
The first statement, yes and no, because I didn't know that was going to be an issue later on, where I was losing, and it was, oh my God, if I lose another fight, you know, you have all those emotions of low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and that's a huge hurdle to jump. But in the second statement that you made, yes, very true, because, you know, not everyone can jump in the ring. And I've had guys come up to me when I had one of my fights in Wollongong, what was it? Dapto was the place, come up to me after the fight. And although I did lose, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. That was amazing. Well done for you doing that. And it's like, really? So you don't sort of understand, you know, although they were amateur fights, you're still getting in the ring. And so you don't really understand that difference coming from someone else who's never done it and will never do it, to actually being in there doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've never been in the ring. Oh, actually, I lie. I've been in a backyard boxing ring when I was in high school. It's really funny. So we got a group of our friends together, and I was a big I was into fighting back in the day, you know. So I was you know, I would get into fist fights. That was my area of hey, look at me. I'm connected. I'm you know, I'm a badass. I can beat you. That sort of stuff, you know. So I had that bravado that I try to pass off, because I was you know, in retrospect, I was super insecure, but that was just a matter of what I wanted to portray to other people. And you know, a few of our friends, in inverted commas, because I mean, we didn't hang out with them a lot, but we just knew that they were doing a backyard boxing sort of thing. Yeah, I'll jump on in. And I remember my first fight, because I was smoking back then. I wasn't in tip-top shape. I was thin. I was you know, I was bulky in a sense that I had muscle on me, and I had heart. And then I went up against like a really tall guy, but he was super skinny, and never having any boxing experience before, I brawled with him, you know. So I just ran in. I was just trying to throw punches up and down, and after like 10 seconds, I got so puffed out that I can't even remember who won. I think it might have been a draw, in terms of we just both clocked out, and the next person's came in. But just coming into it, it was just like that. I can identify with you know, a tiny minuscule bit of your experience of jumping into the ring and going up against something and realizing, hey, this is harder than I thought. Like I thought I could take this guy at any point, you know, but then I was proved wrong. So it's interesting, those experiences. Now, having said that, I've never invested myself in fighting as a more disciplined approach, no matter how much I wanted to. So that's why when I hear you kind of put yourself out there, put yourself in the ring, train really hard, go to the point of losing weight, 3 kilos just before the fight time. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of tenacity that takes, and the amount of commitment that you may not have seen at the time, but then even if you lose or win a fight, people flock to you, as you saw with those guys, and they're like, wow, you killed it out there, you know. And I guess my question is, what did you find after those after they said those things? How did that sit with you, thinking that I've lost, but these people are still, you know, praising me for the input that I put in?
It certainly changes your perspective because, you know, obviously you want to get in there, you want to win for yourself, you want to win for your trainer, of course, because he devoted a lot of time. You know, we played through scenarios trying to help me with the psychological issues. So it's a really good compliment. You know, you think you've done a bad job because you haven't won. And in saying that, as long as you do a good job in the ring, you know you've done a good job, so you can't walk away going, oh, you know, I lost, oh my God. But there have been times like that too, which are all in the book. But no, it was a compliment because it's like these are grown-ass men, sorry for swearing, that, you know, you'd think there's no way they're going to come and approach me.
Be yourself.
And they come and approach you to say, oh, mate, you know, that was awesome, you know. So good to see you up there. You did such a great job. And it's like, really? I did that? And yeah, you walk away with confidence.
So was confidence a byproduct of not just not winning, but just putting yourself out there in your experience?
Yes. I have to say the answer is yes now. I wouldn't have known it at the time. Because, I mean, look, even with what I did with you asking to be on your podcast, I would probably have never done that, you know, a few years ago. So, yeah, I think as the years progressed, the more experience I got, I am good at my skills in the boxing. I haven't fought in the last 10 years, although both of my trainers want me to fight again. Yeah, I think it is. It's true. The confidence just does grow. And going back to what I said as well, you know, when you've got enough people believing in you, you do start to believe in yourself, and you sit back and you think, well, you know, if they think I'm good, if they want to spend time with me, well, obviously there must be something good there, you know, that I haven't just seen yet. But I see that now, and I've seen that for the last few years. And that's a testament definitely to the martial arts. Mixed
martial arts has come more and more on the scene since the UFC took over under new management through Dana White. Back, I think it was in the 90s where they jumped on board there, and then even more so with the Ultimate Fighter, you know, competition back in when I was 15 years old. That's when that came on board, and I remember watching the first season of the Ultimate Fighter. Before then, most people didn't really know what mixed martial arts were, and any type of conversation about my martial art is better than your martial art was always just over a you know, drink and just kind of, you know, braving chest and that sort of stuff. So but the UFC and mixed martial arts in particular, they really put that to the test. You've got training in multiple martial arts. Did you ever decide that you wanted to combine these martial arts together and kind of put yourself in the cage and say, hey, let's do some MMA?
Honestly, no. I was actually very anti-MMA. When I first heard about MMA is in the States, can't even think now, 2012, I was talking to a young man and he was telling me, oh, I want to jump in and, you know, go into the ring and do MMA. But as much as I probably prefer it more than the UFC, I'm an old school believer where you should learn each martial art separately and learn it well, and then move on to learn another martial art. Like I spent 11 years, you know, fine tuning, starting from, you know, karate and then the boxing and the kickboxing, and fine tuning all these arts. And I think that's a better way, because with MMA, you know, they don't use all of them. If you've seen MMA fights, they'll predominantly use probably boxing, kickboxing, and of course when they get on the ground, there's a lot of the jiu-jitsu. So for me, I much prefer learning it individually and mastering it individually.
Yeah, there is an argument for that. You know, for people who really are passionate about one particular martial art, and though they may expose themselves to all these different types of martial arts, it's, you know, they're I hesitate to use the word, but a purist at heart in terms of let's master and make our experience, this is the way it is. But you find that in any discipline. I especially find that in psychotherapy, that you have people that become purists in their own modality, and they wouldn't stray from their modality, whether that's a cognitive behavioral approach where they focus on thoughts and feelings and emotions and behaviors, or from a body-based point of view. There's over 400 different types of modalities that you would work at. I guess that's the argument. You would always find people who would be more comfortable with one area, but see the utility of many of them. And then you'll be people jumping from the get-go, not becoming proficient in one, but trying to master all of them. And in any discipline, I would say there are drawbacks to that area. Yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that one.
Look, I totally agree, especially from the martial arts perspective, from the psychotherapy perspective and the modalities through that. I like learning about different, therapies that can be used, with people, but that's where I'll sort of jump back into the martial arts, because a lot of the therapies that we use out there, you actually can use physically through the martial arts, and that's where they overlap. So you don't actually have to sit down, have a conversation with someone. It actually comes out through the training. And that's the other thing that I do. I try and match the training or the art to the issue, which appears black and white, but obviously, you know sort of what issues appear. And especially, for example, let me use anger, because I had a lot of anger issues and anxiety. I know that boxing helps with that, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. I love this. All right, let's jump into that. How do you match the martial art, the training, the issue? Like, give me an example on anger to begin with, and then we'll jump into other areas as well. How do you process that?
From my own experiences, I guess some of the kids that I've been training now who have come to me, or the parents have come to me with their kids having anxiety issues, I utilize my own experiences, because obviously I've come, on the other side of that. Not to say that, things like that don't come up, but it's not as big an issue as it used to be. So what I appreciate and grateful to these parents are, they come to me, their kids are mostly under the age of 10, explaining to me the background. And I find with the boxing, it actually helps, because there's that depends. Let me just go back a bit. Depends on the age. So if they're under like 7 or 6 years old, I use the karate. And once I find, things have been helping, like the parents will tell me, obviously these kids have improved. Then I sort of change over to the boxing, but I generally start with the karate. However, I've just recently got a new young client who needs 10, and he's got a lot of anger issues. So I've gone straight to the boxing with him, but I do more of the technical. It's not putting gloves on and just hitting. It's more from the discipline and focus approach. So it's how to move, how to put your hands up, how to, start walking with the boxing, no hitting at all. And then we start, what we call skipping, moving forward and backwards. And so it's breaking it up in steps to have this person focus. So you're basically exhausting your brain. And the same thing happens to me, where I go and train with my trainer. I use actually his approach. I've stolen it and he knows. But it's going from the beginning, from those steps, and then moving forward to where I think, okay, I think we're ready to put the gloves on. I think we're ready to move forward in that respect.
Wow, I love that. So it sounds to me like it's a very intentional, mindful appreciation of the training process, so that you're not just going in there and like punching stuff to get that anger out, or breaking things. It's almost like you're developing a control over the physical experience through that process. Yeah, and I can see you nodding, because I think I've tapped in on that one.
Correct, absolutely correct. Because again, it would depend on the age group, like I said, what their issue is. Like I've got older adults that train with me, in their 30s, whatever. And if they're not right, like if they've had a bad day or whatever, because we've already fine-tuned some of those areas and they're obviously not kids, then I will delve into straight away, let's put the gloves on, let's start hitting, let's just get it out. But that's a different age group, different maturity. And, most people that age will understand they've got their own self-awareness, where kids aren't quite developed there yet, which means I have to control that sort of, their movements, what they're doing.
Definitely. You kind of being that mentor, that guide, where you're able to kind of move into, okay, do this in this. Kids need direction and kids need boundaries. This is really important. And having two kids myself, both my kids do MMA, and they've only recently started. One of my children, he finds it very difficult to pay attention in class. And since he started doing the MMA, we've had objective reports from his teachers and from himself that he's been able to pay more attention to class. And in a previous interview where I talked about ADHD with Dr. James Greenblatt, he talked about how there's evidence that is accumulating that martial arts can really help when it comes to kids who find it difficult to pay attention. And my son is really funny. He kind of, whenever anyone asks him how he's doing in class, he's like, oh yeah, I'm doing MMA now, and I really think it helps to pay attention. And he's really into like jujitsu, because he's so he doesn't study jujitsu, but he loves the takedowns and all that sort of stuff, to kind of do that sort of thing. So it's really fun to see. And so I guess my question for you is, when it comes to different conditions, so things like ADHD or anger, or you've mentioned anxiety and stress and that sort of stuff, how wide-ranging would you say, either your experiences or what you've read or come across in the research that backs this up? Can MMA be used, or any type of martial arts be used to address a variety of different issues or a variety of different concerns?
Let me just start. How cute for your son. I saw the little video. Very cute. Second, to answer your question, I think any art...
Vickie's speaking about a video I posted on social media, for those who haven't seen it, where one of my children is lagging behind in their MMA class, and everyone else has gone to the finishing line, but he's still there with another really young child, and then all the coach starts to say, hey, everyone give them a clap, encourage them, and they were still taking too long to go in. So the coach got the entire group of kids to go back to where they were and bring it back home. And you just saw how my son and the other child really put in that extra effort when everyone else was bringing them home. So for those who haven't seen that one, they can check that one out on my social media platforms. But continue on, Vickie. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's right. Everyone, you should watch that video. But I've been in that same position. You're fighting and people are just yelling out, although it had a negative effect. For most normal people, it has a positive effect. But anyway, going back to what you were saying about the research, when I first developed this business to do what I'm doing, bringing the martial arts and the counselling together, there wasn't a lot of research out there, and there still isn't, because I wanted to see what was out there before, moving forward on that project. But to answer your second question about, can you sort of use any of the disciplines of the martial arts to help with the issues? I actually think you can. And that's where I came up with this little sort of diagram. I should have brought it with me. I could have showed you. I'll send it through, maybe post it. Which because it's come through a lot of experience of my own, 5 years in Taekwondo, 11 years, working through the different modalities or disciplines or martial arts that I went through, and the experiences of seeing other kids going through similar things that I did, even when I was there for how many years, and, watching kids being terrible behavior, really disruptive behavior, to being, oh my God, so focused, so disciplined. So I definitely agree with your statement about, yes, you can use the different arts for the different issues, which is what I sort of put together. But of course, you've got to be really careful on looking at, you know, the age group of the child, like I mentioned earlier, or adult even, what the issue is, and really understanding your art and how that works from the psychological point of view, because you don't want to make things worse, for example. So if you're looking at working with someone who's got post-traumatic stress disorder, I probably wouldn't be getting them to do boxing or stuff like that, you know, can get you heightened. I would be looking at more of the karate type work, even like a Tai Chi. Not that I'm experiencing Tai Chi, but that sort of stuff to sort of change the way of thinking, because there is that neuroplasticity that is affected, or, you know, our brains are affected and they adapt to these different movements and change the way we think and see things. So, yeah, it can be done, but you've really got to understand the issues plus the art that you're trying to combine.
So when it comes to your own experiences of trying to adapt or adjust these therapies to a particular issue, what was the first one that you wanted to start off with in terms of integrating a martial art to a particular issue?
Well, I'd have to say, because my experience with anger and anxiety was what off my own experience, that was probably one of the first things that I wanted to combine. And funnily enough, I've had a lot of clients, especially these parents, that have come to me and have said to me, you know, my child is disruptive. He gets very angry in class, very angry at home, you know, fights with his sister, fights with us. If I'm allowed, I'll give you a quick example. I've been seeing this client now. He's 10, and I've seen him twice.
Please.
We've got our next session tomorrow. We had a first session 2 weeks ago, and I generally follow up with the parents to see how the kid, you know, the child, his experience with the training, obviously, because it's all about rapport as well. And the mum wrote back to me, and she basically said that, you know, he definitely wants to do it. He really enjoyed it. He really enjoyed your sense of humour, because clearly we've got the same one. But the thing for me was, he came home, he was helping his mother in the kitchen, you know, they were having a chat. So it was almost like a different little boy over this one session.
So that speaks to the immediate utility of this particular approach when it comes to, what do you think it is? Like, do you think it's, actually, I'll let you answer that, because I have my own suspicions, but what do you think it is about the approach that helps immediately almost?
I think, obviously, you got to build that rapport, and I like to think, and it's proven that I can drop to sort of any level. I love working with kids. I integrate, you know, some of our therapies in the training. You know, I'll talk to the kids on their level. And, you know, I ask them questions about their life, how they're going, you know, school, favorite subjects, basically everything about them, and make them the focus. So, you know, if you like, client-centered, you know. So I incorporate a lot of our therapies in minute ways to get to know the child more and make it about them.
So rapport is one really important thing. I mean, you've got to feel comfortable to do anything in terms of when it comes to relationships. And if you're trying to learn a new skill within the context of a relationship, then building that rapport, that becomes instrumental. When it comes to the actual skills, could you see that there were any particular skills you may have taught them apart from just connecting with them on a social level? Was there any particular skill?
In terms of the martial arts skill, yeah, for example, this kid has picked up, you know, boxing skills straight away, the way he moves, the way he walks. Even my littlest, you know, he's 6, 7 years old, and his kicks are sensational. From the psychological perspective, I mean, from this 10-year-old that I've just spoken to you about, he's obviously thought about what I've said and incorporated in home life. Same with his 6-year-old, which I can't go into too much detail, but he had a lot of issues at school, no friends, etc. But that's also changed. Same with what you were saying with report cards from, you know, your son's teachers. it's kind of the same thing here with this. They haven't had any, phone calls or reports or anything. Everything's been positive. So, and especially with the little ones, I teach resilience. I really focus on the resilience because life is going to get harder as we get older. And this is the one thing that needs to stick. But on the other side of that, it's always keep your hands up, look after Brian or the brain. So, yeah.
You mentioned that anger was something that you reverted to really quickly, especially in the context of boxing, because there was a lot about that in your own personal experience, which you detail in your book. I want to know for our listeners, do you mind sharing a little bit of your struggles with anger and how you were able to integrate them and kind of work through with them?
To be honest, I'm happy to share. The anger, I didn't actually realize where it was coming from. And back, growing up, no one sort of labeled, anxiety and things like that. It was purely, why you're angry, what's going on with you. No one tried to figure out the why. And so for me, I spent a lot of years being angry, and I did actually go speak to a doctor about seeing a therapist. And they basically told me, there's nothing wrong with you, you're fine. So, of course, when you hear that, as I think I was 21 at the time, it hits the self-esteem and the self-confidence. And then you're thinking, oh, yeah, no, I'm fine. There's obviously nothing wrong with me if he's saying that. And then, unfortunately, you don't sort of, realize that it's a problem until, another decade, which is what happened to me. Because it was this on and off effect, and depending on what I was doing. But it really came to fruition through my training, because I had days where I was so angry. I could come into training and everyone could feel this anger and you didn't even know where it was coming from. And I guess it was, obviously big percentage was the martial arts and the boxing and the trainer and the people around you, but more so me. And I remember coming to a point of, you know what, I don't want to be angry anymore. I'm so tired of being angry. I want to be anything else but angry. So how do we fix this? Which is where I, with the training, I went, if I'm going to be, I started seeing a therapist actually. I started training them and it was really funny. They could see straight through me. He was so good at his job. And they could feel that I wanted to go seek a therapist or therapy. But of course, growing up European, and maybe you can relate to this, you never spoke about therapy. You were going to say to go see a therapist because it was all a big stigma, especially around those circles, and especially growing up in a country town where there was a lot of Europeans. So, that didn't even enter your head. But I thought to myself, I've got to do something. And it took months, but I finally did go into therapy, and, you bring food so you don't cry because you are going to cry. And I think after my first experience with therapy, I went, that's what I want to do. But if I'm going to do that, I have to do everything to help myself first and not to be a hypocrite before I start treating and helping other people. So that's sort of, I was just tired of being angry.
It's such a funny story. Funny not as in humorous, but in another interview I had, one of my William Centurion, he's a performing artist and a therapist now and coach. He mentioned that because of all the stress that he was experiencing with the performing arts, with acting, singing, and all that sort of stuff, he had to go and see a therapist. And it was after seeing the therapist that he decided, hey, this is something that I want to do as well. And in my own experience, being able to guide people through therapy, and they're like, oh, well, it'll be good to do something that you do. I mean, it's really nice to have that sense that you've made an impact in somebody's experience, that they want to model that within their own career choice. And it seems like the therapist that you saw did such an amazing job that you were able to say, I want to integrate this into my life and become, provide something that I think they should, that I could help others. But to pick up on your statement, my family comes from Romania, and I grew up in church from a very young age. We used to go to church twice every Sunday, and sometimes for prayer nights. 2 hours in the morning, 3 hours, or 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, 5 hours on a Sunday, and there was no discussion around mental health or anything like that. Any problem you had, you could bring it to God, and as a man, you wouldn't talk about what you're going through. It's not something that you would necessarily speak with anybody else about, because it would be perceived as weakness. Even today, many people would. I think very, very, very slowly there is a bit of a breaking away from that. I want to call it prejudice, but I don't think that's the right word. A kind of assumption that to speak about your feelings, there's an issue there that makes you weaker, so to speak. So I can definitely relate to that one. Now, what was your upbringing like? What were some of the main things that you remember, of your upbringing, and how that led you into your own path?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I grew up in a country town. We were surrounded by a lot of, let's say, Greeks. I guess initially it was, I didn't want to live there, and I still don't want to live there. For me, even the first chapter of my book was born in the wrong place. And I'm not having a dig at the place itself. It was probably more the environment, the people, because, back then it worked on status, where, my parents were low socioeconomic, and then you had your medium and, of course, your high. So that was one of the things that we had to deal with, because, my parents didn't have, or I didn't have, or my siblings didn't have what other people had. At the end of the day, my parents did the best that they could. Migrants themselves, they came from Greece. Obviously, we didn't speak about feelings and stuff back then, but they really have a huge understanding of it. And because I used to think, because I have a knack of reading people quite quickly, and I used to think, oh, it's my little special magic trick as a kid, because my siblings used to come to me and sort of say to me, oh, tell me about so-and-so. What do you think about this person? But obviously it comes from, your genetics. And I've learned, from the last 10, 15 years, because you can really appreciate, your parents as you do get older. And I got that from them. Both of them are so good at reading people, the psychology, and they really understand the psychology, and they appreciate like where I'm coming from now, and really, super supportive of what I'm doing within my business. But it was hard back then. I didn't want to be there. I was always meant to be a city kid, never meant to be a country kid. That statement will never change. Obviously I've got to thank, I guess, in hindsight and in retrospect, growing up there, because it made me who I am today. And, I've got the book, I've got the business. I am who I am because of that, and despite of that, I guess.
There are a few things I want to pick up on, because really important streams of conversation here. So one of the things that sticks out to me, I mean, a lot of this happens in retrospect. We kind of come to an awareness when we have an availability of more input data later on in life, that this is the way things are now, this is what led to it. And so when we look back, it's like, hey, that was, it's something that happened, something you can't change. There were amazing elements of it, and there were really crappy elements of it. I can relate to that in my own life. My main motivation to do what I did was because I remember making a promise to myself when I was a teenager. I'm like, I will never marry a Romanian. And I didn't. It's really funny that my experience at the time was just like, nah, I don't want to be part of that, perpetuating what I experienced as a really negative cultural element. But then there was some really amazing, like growing up in church, you make your friends, you make memories, and you have some really great things that amount to or come out of that, and you can initiate certain changes, and in particular you can understand where people come from when you look back at it, or appreciate why they do what they do. And these days I have conversations with my parents, and they kind of come to me, and they're like, oh, what's your opinion on this? Or tell me a little bit about this, or can you help me with this? And it's a lot of the emotional regulation stuff and understanding emotions. I'm like, yeah, awesome. Let's jump on into it. And then when I meet other Romanians, or if I bump into them, I'm friendly. I have conversations. It's just not what I saw my life going to, even as a young child. So my sense is that you can identify with various elements of that in your own experience.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it just reminded me of, so I'm been talking to my mum's friend. Like, we have a couple of conversations because we have the same love for the bold and the beautiful. Absolutely love that soap opera, because soap operas for me, just going back to childhood, was one of the other things that kept me sane living in the country. They were this is what I want to do, this is what I want to, in my future, not so much, have so much money, but that's the kind of life I want to live. And it's really funny you say about you have this greater appreciation as you get older, not only for my parents. I mean, like I said, it wasn't easy. You do have some fond memories, but you have some great, not so fond memories. But most recently, and probably a few years ago, when I went to visit my folks, obviously we can't do that now, one of my mum's friends was visiting, and we just started talking. And I don't think I've ever had conversations with her for like 2-3 hours over my lifetime. And the last time I did visit, I went to visit her. She's in a home, and we sat again for a couple of hours just talking about everything. And, she's even called me on the phone, and we converse about the bold and the beautiful. So, it's such this great change from when you're as a child, where you don't even want to be in the same sort of room as them because they're your parents' friends, versus, being of this age where you love going to visit them, having this conversation. I mean, look, I always had this maturity, and I say that because it comes from my siblings, because my brother's 6 years old and my sister's 9. So you always, even though I was the youngest, there was always that maturity level that you sort of had to have, always hanging out with my sister's friends, because my age group, it wasn't interesting enough for me. And going back with what you were saying also, I also was interested in people's behavior, why they behaved the way they did. And, a lot of those behaviors haven't actually changed in the Riverland with people my own age, and even with their kids, there's this cycle the same. So, yeah, it's really interesting that you can see a lot more of it. And even writing the book, that was cathartic, because when I first started writing, it was like, I hate this person and I hate this person. They did this to me. And as the years progressed, it's like you sort of read it, and I had an editor to help me out. Do I really need to be discussing these people? Does this affect me now? No, let's chop it, move on to, by the time you get to the end of it, you just want the points that when people read it, they can resonate with or relate to, or know someone else that can relate and resonate to.
I find, and for anyone who's got a skill in writing, who's listening to this, or has been told that they're good at writing, or just want to experiment writing, because a lot of people have an assumption that, oh, I'm not good at this, but other people can kind of like say, nah, actually you've got some sort of passion for that. I would say that anytime I've written an account, now I write a lot, so I've written my kids stories and all that sort of stuff, and I write non-fiction, I've written fiction, and it's a matter of putting pen to paper and allowing, it's almost like you're purging certain parts of yourself. Even when I was writing fiction, I read a book called A Killer's God, and it was really interesting because the plot line is about a person who escapes, who's in a drug-induced psychosis, and they're trying to escape from what they think is like a whole bunch of people that are just chasing after him. And this guy finds refuge in a boutique cafe in a small Melbourne town, and he kind of pulls out a knife and escorts everyone out there, and kind of the story just progresses to him coming into a psychiatric ward, meeting somebody, and kind of going from there. And so the story focuses on a whole range of different people that I noticed were different expressions of what I've been experiencing or what I've been feeling, or I can kind of relate to the characters in there. I can be like, okay, this person speaks like this, but this person speaks like this. And they're both expressions of what I can identify with. Being a human, we can identify with human nature. We can kind of get into these senses of what we're trying to describe. But then even when I'm talking nonfiction, when I'm writing my own experiences within the context of an article or of a book that I might be working on, you see it from the outside. You see yourself, it's almost like you're writing yourself and you're one level back or a couple levels and layers back. And this is what I feel like we do in therapy. We try to bring it so that we're not reliving or re-experiencing a particular issue from the context of reliving a trauma. It's about seeing it from an outsider's point of view and being able to observe it. So whenever I do therapeutic techniques, and anyone at home can try these sorts of things, they can close their eyes and imagine themselves one step back, as if they're watching their thoughts, or if they're watching themselves having those thoughts, as if on a computer screen or on a cinema screen. Did you find that your experience with writing was a little bit like that, or did you find that your experience with writing was kind of like you were in the middle of it, reliving it, and then taking a step back each time you went back to edit it or whatever it is? Tell us about that.
To begin with, when I first started writing, just to go back, I'm not a writer either. I love my creative writing. That's why you get editors and people to do that sort of work. But I write, and many people have said that to me, I write like I speak. So they could literally feel me on their shoulder. But just going back with what you were saying in terms of the writing, yes, I was in it. Everything I do, I'm an all or nothing. So I'm in it. If I'm going to do something, I'm in it. But as I sort of progressed, and like you said, you leave it for a bit, you go back, you leave it for a bit. And that's what I found, because the book isn't that big. I'm sure I could have included a lot more. But it started off probably this big and then went to that big. Because when I was first in it, it was just to get everything out. And like going back to my childhood, I used to write little stories as well, fictional stories, and watch those soap operas to have that escape. So it's kind of the same thing with writing the book. It was just a different way to escape, to get it all out of my head. So to begin with, it was, like I said earlier, oh my God, this person did this to me, yada, yada, yada. But as I progressed and kept going back and forth, you then do take that sort of step back and you go, okay, from this perspective now, from where my life is now, from where I am now, is this important? No, yes, step back again. Because obviously you grow as a person through my training, through, my therapy, and through my own self-awareness, because I'm very self-aware. I know myself very well. You tend to look at it in a different way. So it is taking that sort of step back to go, okay, what is important here? What do I want people to know about not only my story, but how it can sort of help them?
Is so much to be said about that. I do a lot of reading, and one of my favorite authors is Stephen King, and he writes a lot of awesome thrillers / horrors / suspense, novels. And he wrote a nonfiction memoir where he talks, it's called On Writing, a memoir of the craft. And in it, he says that the first time you write, you write with the door closed. You just get everything out there, whatever it is that you're writing, you get it all out there. And then, you let it sit for a little bit, and then you go back to it. And this time you leave the door open. And when you're writing the second time, you're writing for others. So you're trying to see, what is somebody else who's reading this? How much of this can they pick up, rather than me just splurging what I want to do, because it's a cathartic process. And the third time you write is like the revisional process, where you're like, you cut out everything. I think he's like, you cut out about a good novelist will cut out about 40% of what they've written, and kind of rehash and get rid of arcs of stories. I found that in my own experience, I would get rid of major story or kind of subplots in the books and in sort of areas, just like you mentioned you have, that would make a good story in and of itself, but within the arc of the book doesn't really contribute to much. So I can see that. One other thing I do want to pick your brain on is you mentioned that your parents were really good at reading people, and that seems to be something that you were able to glean from them as well. And I'd like to understand something, because over time I've been working as a therapist for about 7 or so years now, a little bit more with the training, and I've seen over 1,000 people in the context of the work that I do. And I think it's really interesting because the people that I see that are the most excellent at reading others and reading the non-verbal cues are the people who have been hurt the most. And it's often people who have been hurt the most that can pick up on these cues, because implicitly they're constantly scanning non-verbal behavior for approval or for dismissal. And they can pick up, like, if a person like raises their eyebrows, or if a person like sharpens their focus, or if their pupils dilate, or their nose flares, or a lip kind of, comes up, and just the whole posturing and how long it takes to respond to someone, all these non-verbal thing, they're highly tuned in to pick up all this sort of stuff. And they can tell you, I trust this guy or I don't trust this guy, and I can know from the first time I meet him that this is what's going on. Have you ever thought about it like that, or do you have any other kind of bits of wisdom that you can kind of share with me around your experiences there?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying, but for me, it's mainly the eyes. I don't really look at other cues. My dad says to me he looks at every other cue. He looks at where they come from in Greece. That gives him an indication. But I think my mum and myself are very similar. I just look at the eyes. Like, for example, for you, I reckon you're a really nice person, and I can see that from your eyes. Like, and sometimes it does take a while. I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet, but I've never been proven wrong. Sometimes it might take time, because there are bits where you sort of go, okay. But generally, people are an easy read. Like, you can, in some instances, like a good friend of mine who I met at work, she has so much goodness. She resonates so much goodness that you can't see anything else. But then you can see also there's a darkness there. So you can get the two different elements. Other people, you can see they've been hurt in life as well, making that comment. And you're probably right. We have that ability because of the hurt. So it's easy to go, yes, no, dismiss you, no, you'll be a good person. But also on the other side of that, I've had people say to me, you're just too much. This same friend that I was talking about, but I can appreciate that you're misunderstood. So, you keep that friendship. But yeah, for me, I mean, I don't say it in, I'm so good I can read you, but it probably does come from what you're saying about being hurt over the years, not being able to trust people, who have pretended to be your friend or whatever, and they have hurt you, that you have this, ability. But then there's the empathetic side as well to that, I think, because the more of that being able to read people, you also have that empathetic side.
There's so much to it. I mean, it's difficult to know where to go from there, because there is an element of just being human. There's so much more to just whether this person's good or bad. I think humans, in my own experience, if we look back into history, there's always a potential, and it's often a demonstrable potential towards evil. And this evil only would kind of be brought about by the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And it's really interesting because Philip Zimbardo did a lot of research in what makes people evil. If you want to use inverted commas, fine. But I would say, the situation, there's been books written on, there's often a trajectory towards acting in really bad ways that we have to constantly check ourselves with, because I know my heart is as black as could be if I let it, and I often joke with my clients. I'm like, if all my thoughts were broadcast on a loudspeaker, I'd probably be in jail, So it's kind of like, how do you regulate and bring that down and maintain control over it? There's a saying, you would rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And the meaning behind that is you've got to know where you stand and have the training and have the ability to regulate and control and have the skill to bring out that sword if you need to, but to keep that contained, to keep it sheathed, rather than being oblivious to all the crap that's around you and not be skilled for any of it. There's an interesting, you come from Greece, and there's the New Testament was written in Greek. That's the Christian Bible has a lot of really interesting lessons. But as far as I'm aware, there's a Greek word that relates to meek, and they say, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And often, meek is a consideration that somebody is very agreeable, very softly spoken, very humble, and all that sort of stuff. And you look at history and like, no, actually, history doesn't really bear that out. How are they going to inherit the earth? They're usually the people that get trampled on oftentimes. I mean, even Gandhi was killed. So their story may live on, but that sort of stuff kind of comes out. And one definition of the word meek, and I can't remember what the word is in Greek. But it has the connotation of a person who has a sword, but the sword is kept in the sheath. And it's really interesting that you have a potential to do so much destruction as you would with martial arts, but when you're taught to contain that and to mindfully move forward, I think, in my experience, and I've got so much more to learn, moving forward. But as far as I understand it right now, it seems like that's what being human is about: knowing the potential between how screwed up you are and how much amazing potential you have, and balancing those two. What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree with that. Where I work, I work with youth. And often they say, "What is wrong with you?" And I'll be like, so many things. But it is exactly what you're saying. And I think the martial arts helps with that. Because, in martial arts training, they think, it will encourage violence. But it actually doesn't. It has a reverse effect. It makes you delve into your own head and makes you understand that you don't have to be violent. It actually teaches you, let's use the word, to be meek. Look, I still struggle with my anger now, but, it's really good to have strong people around me, like this friend that I mentioned earlier, that does pull you aside because they do care. And they sort of say, she says to me one day, "Do you not have anything between your mouth and your brain to stop you from saying things?" Because I am a very direct person. But it's also good to have that. But exactly with what you're saying, we all have that darkness is in us. And it depends in the environment that we're in and how we self-regulate. So for me, the self-regulation comes from my own self-awareness, friends, environment, and the arts, and especially with boxing.
What got you to first of all, dedicate that fully and go into study? My understanding is you've got an undergraduate in psychology, a graduate diploma in counseling, and a master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy. And these sorts of things, that they require a lot of dedication, a lot of work, a lot of putting yourself forward and putting yourself out there. And then you learn a lot of these different modalities and these different therapies within the context of that. What got you interested in just starting that and just say, okay, well, I'm going to dedicate all this time to become the best therapist that I can be, and then I'm going to shape it even further to work with martial arts in the context of this. Tell us a little bit about that process.
There were two things there, probably three things. Make myself better, but that was or be my best self, I guess, is how I promote it. But the byproduct of that was my niece was born, She's going to be 19 next year. So, you know, I wanted to be a good example for her, but even more so, and it's funny, you know, I never liked kids when I was younger, and I'm sure, you know, there's probably a lot of people out there that didn't, you know, I'm talking like in my 20s, under 20s, just didn't have time for them. But then when I was training in the martial arts, there was this young kid that attached herself to me, and she would have been 15 at the time, and she had a lot of issues at home, and I don't know, she just connected, and, you know, I became, I guess, I don't know, whatever you want to call me, this surrogate parent, friend, guardian, where we just built this rapport. And I just found myself looking out for her. And I guess she was the catalyst to, if I want to do this and I want to help this kid, not that I was aiming to help her, it just happened sort of organically. And we're still friends to this day. And she's a mum of two, and she's done amazing. But yeah, it was, I guess, that point where I went, well, hang on a minute. If I want to be an example, I can't be getting angry. I can't be doing this. And she made this point when we were training, like, and it made me sad at the time. She was training, and we're doing stick fighting at the time, preparing for a competition. And she was like, hit me harder because I don't want to feel the pain. I like being hit. And I thought to myself, you're 15 years old. What would make you want to be like that? And how have you become like that? And how have these thoughts entered your head? So I guess from that instance on, it was like, okay, not only do I want to help myself and work with adults, I actually want to work with kids. You know, and as much as I might have had a little bit to do with who she's become now, I'd like to think so. I mean, we still talk now. That's what I suppose was the catalyst to go, okay, I've got to study. And I've always had an interest in human behaviour, even from a little kid, where I'm interested in why people behave the way they behave. And of course, the study comes to wanting to be a therapist. So you've just got to take, you know, the study with it. And I already had the discipline from the training and the focus from that. So to me, it wasn't, yeah, granted, it was another level because I was no academic writer by no means. I remember my first assignment, I gave it to my friend, and there was all these red marks on it. And I never gave her another assignment again because it was like, oh my God, I cannot be this bad at this. But obviously I improved, like with anything, you know what I mean? You know, with training, because I was horrible when I first started in the martial arts, but became better where I was teaching the little ones. So I think the little ones was always this in my subconscious, and training kids and, you know, the martial arts. So I guess the next step was focusing on the study. And it wasn't really study for me. I loved reading, you know, about the psychology behind things and people. And I still love it now. That's why I listen to, you know, podcasts about different, you know, therapies and what different struggles people are having, and reading books about it. So it wasn't really an effort in itself. The study itself was, the writing assignments was, but not the learning.
And you mentioned the key word there, discipline. Was discipline for you learned, or is it something that you had more inherent than other people around you?
I believe, and this is only a story I know from my dad, it was inherent because I learned to ride a bike on my own, no training wheels. I was determined to do it from the age of about 4 or 5.
That's really interesting. So discipline is really interesting because people in today's culture, discipline isn't valued as much as it used to be because of what exposure we have with everything being so immediate. I mean, there's a matter of clicking on a button. I mean, I've spoken about this in previous podcast interviews, but being able to say, okay, well, I want this now, and for all intents and purposes, you can pretty much get whatever you want right now. In the extreme of that is drug use or alcohol use, where it's kind of like I can just get an instant fix. And so selling discipline is a really difficult job to do for a person who does not want to discipline themselves but wants change. Because often it's like, I want things to change without wanting to do the work. And for a person who's highly motivated to do the work, that can come across as so annoying. Like tear your hair out annoying. Like, how can you get anything if you don't put in? My next question for you is, do you have anything that we haven't touched on that you really want to share, you really want to talk about, you want to tell our listeners?
I don't actually think so. I think we've touched on pretty much everything. The only thing I will say, if you've exhausted sort of all possibilities, maybe try looking at the martial arts and the counselling and what I have on offer, because I've shared some of these stories, I've shared my own experiences, I've got the book, and drop me a line and we can go from there. But in saying that, in addition to with your discipline question about how do you get someone disciplined who's not disciplined, what I do with the little ones, even though I speak about resilience and I talk about the discipline, it's giving them like little rewards. So I've introduced now little certificates so they can see with each step and each sort of all the sessions that we sort of do, you go that next, look what I sort of received. Obviously, from my point of view in the martial arts, it was receiving belts. Not that was, it was great and it really helped with the self-confidence, self-esteem, but I needed to see it within myself. So someone can tell you till you're blue in the face that, you're good, you're whatever, you'll get through this. Don't be so negative on yourself, that sort of thing. But you have to find it in you. And I think, and yeah, maybe I am biased, but the turning point for me, A, obviously I wanted to change, but B, the martial arts, especially the boxing and getting in that ring. The research that I've done talks about contact and non-contact. So I guess it depends where you want to go with your martial arts and where you want to go with yourself. And I found with the contact especially, and, being in the ring and getting hit, whatever, it was the one thing that really, I guess, switched me around. Being in there, being immersed in it. It's one thing to stand back and you do demonstrations of your katas, which are the combination of the patterns in karate, if no one knows. And that's one thing to do that, and you get the accolades for that. But being immersed in it, really understanding yourself, that's where you really get that understanding of being in the ring. So, and I encourage that as well in my training for myself and others who want to do it. But obviously we have those discussions, if you want to try the martial arts and the counselling combination.
And where could people find you if they wanted to look you up and find out more about you?
They can find me on my website, www.thelloactivetherapy.com. And that's probably the easiest place. Or you can email me, vickiesimos@yahoo.com, which I do have to change. I've got to get with the times, but technology is not my thing. But the other two places that you can find me, or social media platforms, LinkedIn, I'm under my name, Vickie Simos. And the other few places, yeah.
And what is your Instagram handle?
The Boxer Within, which is obviously the title of the book. That sort of came after the Thello Active Therapy. And just on that, Thello is the Greek word for I want, I need. Because a lot of the time where we go to see a therapist or you go to see a trainer, the question is generally asked, what is it that you want? What is it that you need from us? So I thought it was quite fitting to have the name of the business, Thello Active Therapy.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think that's a beautiful way to end today's discussion. Thank you for joining me today, Vickie.
Thank you so much, Emil, for the opportunity and to meet you face to face. And thanks to the listeners. I hope you enjoy this podcast.